What's up, guys? Game Wisdom here, and welcome back to the wise side of YouTube. And after 4 long years of waiting, Chapter 3 and 4 of Deltarune have finally been released over a month ago. Yes, I'm a little bit late to the party, but in my defense, I had my college exams when Chapter 3 and 4 released, and I didn't have the time to make YouTube videos. But now that I'm free and have lots of free time in my hands, it's time to theorize. And what better place to start than the night, Deltarune's mysterious main villain, who after being teased for 6 years finally appeared in the end of Chapter 3. Now, there is a lot of info to go over, and I only have like a year to theorize before Chapter 5 comes out, so let's get into it. So about 4 months ago, I started working on a video where I went through almost every Deltarune character to try and find out who the knight is, and rank them in a tier list depending on how likely I thought they were to be the knight. But I got busy with schoolwork and couldn't finish it in time for the new chapters released, at which point it became completely outdated. But the script for this video is finished, so I thought, why throw the script in the trash and waste all the time I spent writing it when I can reuse it now? So here's how this is going to work. I'm going to go over the candidates that I have something interesting to say about and see how close I go with my predictions. And in the end, I will present my theory for the next backstory and plan, tying everything up. So let's get started. First, of course, is Gaster, the enigmatic mystery man that may or may not be giving us eggs from behind the tree. Gaster is interesting. My argument in that original video script is that we didn't have enough information on Gaster to definitively prove that he's the knight. But the little info we did have could be interpreted as vaguely knight-like, especially if, like me, you interpret entry 17 as Gaster describing the opening of a dark fountain, saying that Gaster is the knight seemed pretty reasonable at the time, but after chapter 3 and 4, I no longer think that. Basically, after going through the new chapters multiple times, Gaster feels more like a distant observer and less like the game's main antagonist. This isn't a new idea, but the community has been a lot more accepting of it after the new chapter is released. But there are still people out there who believe Gaster could still be a main antagonist. I'm not one of them, however, I never have been. There has been this sentiment in the community for a long time now, since chapter 1 basically, that Gaster will appear like chapter 7 as the main villain who has secretly been manipulating us from behind the scenes and dramatically reveal his backstory while using his meta game breaking powers to lock us out of a safe fight and then give us all the answers and hand us his mixtape called the darker side of the moon. But I never bought into that sort of thing. And now some hindsight from the new chapters, it's pretty clear to me that Gaster is not really a part of the game's main story and just kind of doing his own thing in a secondary plot that seems to be strictly between us, the players, and Gaster, and doesn't seem to have really any sort of connection or significance to the main night plot. Like, think to yourself, what does Gaster actually do throughout Deltarune? He appears in the beginning of the game to help us make a vessel and then discards it, and then he kinda disappears for most of the game, except for like a few appearances in the death screen, and then just kind of appears in the end of chapter 4 in this MCU style post-credit scene where he says vague Gaster things and reminds us he's here. The only thing connecting Gaster to the knight is that the knight's hands bear a striking resemblance to the mystery man's hands. Let me remind you that we don't even know for sure if the mystery man is Gaster. So basically there is no evidence for this. To summarize, Gaster Knight isn't true in my opinion, not like at all. But I definitely do think Gaster has some sort of role to play in Deltarune, and I do wanna make a video discussing him in further detail later on, but that's a topic for another day. So, yeah, that's it for Gaster. Anyway, this segment was pretty long, so let's hope the next character doesn't take that long to explain. God damn it. Let's talk Kris Knight. This is a theory I always dislike, mostly because the evidence for it is just we saw Kris open a dark fountain, so they must be the Knight. Conveniently forgetting Queen's monologue about how every lightner can open a dark fountain that we heard like 5 minutes before we see Kris open the fountain. And outside of that astute observation, there is nothing. But I don't need to analyze every piece of evidence for Kris Knight, since chapter 3 deconfirms this pretty definitively. You know, since we literally see Kris and the Knight in the same room fighting each other. That being said, Kris Knight believers, I have some good news for you. Kris might not be the Knight, but they are conspiring with it. The evidence for this gets kinda complicated to explain without having talked about some particular candidates I'm saving for later, but I'll try to anyway, so here we go. Kris and the Knight deal reduced damage to each other during their fight, until the party members get soon at least. Kris also seems to signal it's time to wrap this up, you're getting caught, with the Knight with an inconspicuous cough, if you know him. They also seem to have struck a deal with Tenna to keep the Fangren busy while the Knight does I don't know honestly. They seem to be conspiring the ambiguous phone voice that is either the Knight or is working with them to prevent us from getting the code to the bunker from Dess's guitar, and they just kinda sit around and wait for the Knight to knock them down if you manage to dodge the Knight swords in the start of the first Sanctuary Dark World, and they actually just get knighted if you beat the Knight in chapter 3. There is also the non-zero chance that Kris was the one that slashed the party members in the end of chapter 3, but that's going into vague and provable theory territory, so I'm not gonna use this as evidence. Basically, it's very, very heavily implied that Kris is working with the Knight to some extent, and it seems the soul is important to their plan as well, but we honestly don't know what is going on with the Knight or to what level Kris is involved, but they definitely seem to be going against the main party members, to some extent at least, trying to slow them down and help the Knight achieve its goal, whatever that may be. But yeah, that about wraps up the Kris Knight discussion. So let's move on. Asgore, our flower-loving, death-killing ex-husband. He was a minor character in the first 2 chapters, who suddenly became super important in chapter 4. Like in chapters 1 and 2, all he really does is get cut by Sans, and I mean, he's still doing that in chapter 4, but now he has the ominous monologues with plot-altering implications, and multiple teasers for him being a boss fight in chapter 5, in the chapter 5 Dark One. But I don't think he's the Knight. So the biggest implication, and piece of evidence I guess for Asgore being the Knight, is the aforementioned ominous dialogue, where Asgore reveals that he has a black sword, which, for those of you who don't remember, is the weapon you get for defeating the Knight, and is confirmed to be a piece of its sword. So I guess that means that Asgore is either working with the Knight, or beat the Knight in combat and has the black sword as a trophy. But I don't think he's actually the Knight. Mostly because he's, well, how do I put this without sounding mean? He's too big to fit the Knight's silhouette. You know, with his dad bod and massive horns that are completely different from the Knight's small antlers. And it also makes just much more sense to me that he's just an associate of the Knight and just doing its dirty work, like how he cleans Carol's toilet, since the monologue implies he's trying to prove his innocence on some matter we're not completely sure about right now. It seems it has something to do with Dess's disappearance, and Dess's disappearance, mostly from the conspiracy courtwards and him getting fired from the police force. I feel like he's begrudgingly going along with the Knight's plan to fix his terrible life situation. I don't have a smoking gun for this, unfortunately, but it does seem like whatever happened was Dess's disappearance. And mostly from a small obscure line you get from inspecting the conspiracy board after the mic fight that says Kris doesn't really like looking at this sort of thing, which implies to me that they probably used to seeing Asgore spend a lot of his time in front of the conspiracy court board, probably working on a case that is unpleasant for Kris, but that's just my interpretation. So, in short, Asgore is probably working with the Knight to some extent, and isn't probably fully in the know as to what his plan is, and is just going along with this to prove his innocence and get his family's love back. And now, finally, let's get to the two main candidates. Carol Holiday has been my main pick for the Knight's identity since Chapter 2, and Chapter 3 and 4 just confirmed it even more in my mind. In the original video I didn't really have any definitive evidence for this, and reached the conclusion of Carol being the Knight through vibes and speculation. She was one of like two characters we hadn't met yet at the time, and she was being built up as an antagonistic force, and had ties to some of the most important characters in the game, the Noel, so it just made sense to me, and now with some hindsight from the new chapters, Major Knight is almost confirmed. Carol, so let's go through the main surface level pieces of evidence. Carol and the Knight have similar antlers. Carol also has not one but two katanas in her house that could totally be the Knight's weapon. She's clearly the mysterious phone voice, with how the phone voice tells Kris, "I'll be right there," when Susie gets Desi's guitar, and Carol appears like 5 minutes later, much earlier than Noel expected her to be back from work, and the first thing she does is grab the guitar and check for the shelter code inside it. And her presentation is very villainous, like in general, with her creepy ambience noise of a theme and her antagonistic attitude towards Susie. There is a lot more. There is so much evidence for this, in fact, that it almost feels intentional. Like Toby wants us to believe Carol is the Knight, like a red herring, just to pull out the rug from beneath us with an even bigger twist later on. Now, I really want Carol to be the Knight. This has been my favorite theory from many years now, but I'm honestly not sure if it will be true. There is one thing that I honestly cannot explain that probably debunks this theory pretty definitively, and that's that in Chapter 4, after Carol comes back to her house to scold Noel in the kitchen, we can immediately go to the church chapel where the Knight is just waiting for us, which either means that Carol isn't the Knight, or if she is the Knight, she somehow like teleported to the church. Yeah, this pretty much deconfirms this theory in my mind. Like, I'm still hoping that it is true, but I don't think it is. But the whole being a red herring thing, and the fact that she wouldn't be able to reasonably be in the church chapel at the time we meet the Knight there in Chapter 4. So, yeah, I think that those are my thoughts in Major Knight. I think it could be true, but it's probably not. Also, I totally predicted her name being Carol like 6 months before it was officially revealed, so I'll pat myself on the back for that one. If you've seen any YouTube video about the Knight after Chapters 3 and 4 came out, then you know why this Knight works, and I mostly agree. Visually, the Knight fits what this would probably look like, with the antlers and the slim body type. The Knight's weapon even looks like a baseball bat when the Knight first summons it. And the first thing we ever learned about this, all the way back in Chapter 1, is that she has a wiffle bat that she uses to exact her revenge on Kris. So it checks out, I guess. But I'll be honest with you, I have no idea what the difference between a baseball bat and a wiffle bat is, but Google tells me they're basically the same thing. So, yeah, that pretty much works very well. Also, I mentioned this now, but a lot of the mannerisms and characterization of the knight would make a lot of sense if it was actually Des, with its whole attitude of basically aura farming all the time and kind of acting like the rebellious teenager that Des is very heavily implied to be. Now, Des Knight honestly perplexed me for a while, and to explain what I mean by that, I'll have to explain to you how I evaluated its candidate in that original video, which wasn't by looking at concrete evidence, but by evaluating them in three categories. The three woulds, if you will, as in could they, would they, and should they. Could they means could a particular candidate have reasonably opened the two dark fountains we knew of at the time. Would they means would the particular candidate have a motive for opening the dark fountains and wanted to cause the roaring. And finally, should they means what does a particular candidate, being the knight, contribute to the game story? Do they make it better, or are they just a twist for the sake of twists? This last category, in fact, is mostly the reason why Knight Papyrus just doesn't work for me. Because the only thing Knight Papyrus really achieves for the plot is have this gacha moment where the knight isn't who we expected them to be. So, going back to Dest, she worked really well for me for the first two categories, but the third one never quite clicked for me. I always thought of her as more of a MacGuffin-like character, where we have to save her in order to defeat the bad guys. You know, we have to find her, not fight her. But after thinking about it for a while and going through the new chapters a few times, I finally realized how this fits into the game's main story in the form of the theory I've been building up to this entire video. Mother 3 theory is based on a suspicion I've had for a while now that Deltarune story is heavily inspired by Mother 3's and is paralleling it in many ways. Mother 3, however, was never released outside of Japan, so most of you probably don't know its story, so here's a quick recap to get everyone on the same page. Also spoilers for Mother 3, obviously. Mother 3 stars two brothers named Lucas and Klaus, whose life take a tragic turn after their mom gets killed by a giant dinosaur monster. Klaus tries to avenge his mother by killing the dinosaur monster, but goes missing and is presumed dead by everyone in town. Later on, Lucas is revealed as the chosen one, who can pull out the magical needles that keep the massive dragon everyone leaves on dormant. And when all the needles are pulled out, the dragon will awaken and either save the world or destroy it, depending on if the person that pulls out the needles has a good heart or not. Then the game turns into a race of sorts between Lucas and a mysterious villain called the Masked Man to see who can pull out the most needles and awaken the great dragon. The game's climax is a final battle between Lucas and the Masked Man for the last needle, where it's revealed that the Masked Man is actually Lucas's brother Klaus, who was Darth Vader after being killed by the dinosaur monster by the game's main villain, the evil Pig King, who wants to use Klaus to pull out the needles and end the world. And the game ends with the Masked Man sacrificing himself so Lucas can pull out the final needle. Those of you who paid attention to my recap or know Mother 3 stories already have probably noticed its similarities with Deltarune's story, and specifically Noel's. But for those of you who didn't notice them, here we go. First of all, we have two families that were torn apart by tragedy. Lucas's family in Mother 3 torn apart by Lucas's mother's death and eventually Klaus's, and the holidays in Deltarune torn apart by whatever happened to Des and later on Rudy's sickness. Then we have the race to prevent the end of the world with the pulling of the magic needles in Mother 3 and the sealing of the dark fountains in Deltarune. And finally, the point I'm trying to make with this whole theory, Des and the Knight are parallels to Klaus and the Masked Man. It's my theory that much like how Klaus was brought back as the Masked Man after his death, Des was brought back as the Knight after whatever happened to her, which I assume was her death or near-death experience. We'll get into that. But instead of being brought back with Darth Vader-esque prosthetics, like the Masked Man, she was brought back with Dark World magic. So here's my take on the story of Des and the Roaring Knife, while trying to tie up the loose points of Kris and Asgore's involvement in the whole thing. Kris, Noel, Asriel and Des were close friends in their childhood, as their parents knew each other from their college years. They would go on many adventures exploring the scarier parts of the town, until tragedy strikes one night when they decide to explore the log shelter in the outskirts of the town. They gain access to it by stealing the codes to it from their parents, who were mayor and police chief respectively. But the shelter had a dark hold in it, trapping the kids inside it when they entered it. Des and Asriel, being the oldest in the group, try to protect their younger siblings, and after much struggle, they manage to escape the dark hold, but at great cost. Des gets mortally wounded and falls down during the escape, and even though Asgore tried to save them, he couldn't get there in time. Overwhelmed by grief from her daughter's death, Carol blamed the entire ordeal on Asgore's incompetence as a cop and fires him from the police force. Toriel also divorces Asgore over this, but Rudy still remains friends with him. Asgore, now alone and jobless, opens the Flower King flower shop where he lives, but his tendency to give away flowers instead of selling them makes it so he doesn't have much money, and he ends up spending most of his time trying to solve Desi's disappearance so he can regain his family's love. At some point, Asgore enters the shelter as part of his investigation, where he finds and battles the knight. He wins the encounter and obtains a black shard as a reward, but he doesn't kill the knight, however, as he finds out that the knight is Des, brought back by the Dark World, like how Gerson was resurrected by it in Chapter 4. Finding out that Des is alive, he tells Carol, who after confirming it for herself, forgives Asgore and starts working with him to find a way for Des to exist outside of the Dark World. She also makes Asgore her house cleaner in order to keep their plans under wraps. The duo researches the Dark World and learns about the prophecy but without all the details. They formulate a plan to cause the roaring so the entire world will be a Dark World and Des will be able to live a somewhat normal life again, not knowing of its world-ending consequences. At some point, Kris also joins the conspiracy, promising to Carol that they will save Des. At this point, Des interrupts the Gunnar Maker sequence and forces the player onto Kris. We know the player's soul is necessary for their plans somehow, as the phone conversations tell us, and the game's main story takes place shortly after. As for the story after Chapter 4, I'm not sure. It's universally agreed that Chapter 5 will have Asgore open a dark fountain in his flower shop after finding out Sanji befriended his ex-wife last night, but after that we don't really know. I always thought that Chapter 6 and 7 would be like a roaring two-parter taking place during the festival, but Gaster said Chapter 4 is halfway point, so I guess Chapter 8 is the final chapter, except Gerson says Chapter 7 was never made, so yes, Chapter 6 is the last one. Honestly, I don't know, but what I can tell you is that there is definitely going to be a Mother 3 moment where Death Knight sacrifices herself after a heart-to-heart with Noel to save the world, Masked Man style, or so I theorize. There are still a few things my theory doesn't answer, so I'll address them now. Number 1. If Des can only exist in the Dark World, how can she take them to the bunker in the end of Chapter 3? I have two answers for this. The first one is that there are two knights. I know. That sounds weird, so let me explain what I mean by this. The whole two knights theory was originally something that I thought of to explain how Carol Lake would still work, even after the whole having to teleport to the church thing for Chapter 4 story to work. Basically what that means is that there are two knights. One of them is Carol, who opens the Dark Fountains, and the second one is Des, who defends the Dark Fountains and poses as the knight who can protect her mother's secret. My second explanation for Des existing in the Light World is that unlike Gerson, she is not completely dead and just fallen down, so it works different, I guess. Number 2. Why the kidnapping? And that use this question to address question number 3. Why did they open the Dark Fountains in the places they did? So here's my answer for those two questions. And it's my belief that they open the funnels in those specific places to take out the people that have the codes to the shelter. One of them, of course, being Carol, who is part of the night conspiracy, so they didn't take care of her. But they needed to find the other two people who possess a code. Undying has the second one, and she gets taken care of in the end of chapter 3. So that's left is the Deltarune code, which after thinking about it is probably Toriel. She owns the school, I think, and the school having the code makes more sense to me than the church. So let's talk about the Dark Worlds. The school and House Dark Worlds quite obvious attempts at getting Toriel. She works at the school in chapter 3, literally takes place in her house. And after the chapter 3 plan failed spectacularly, I opened the chapter 4 Church Dark World in an attempt to get Toriel during choir practice. But of course that didn't work either, since it was cancelled due to the rain. The chapter 2 Dark World, however, perplexes me. It was opened in a computer lab, which doesn't seem to be super connected to any of the 3 people I theorize have the code. My only answer that was probably an attempt to get Undying. They opened it in a public place, so it makes sense for the police to investigate it, I guess. And that's it, I think. There's also like a bit where Carol and Kris have a conversation about sacrificing Undying next week, and I have no idea what that's about. Unless they wanna do like a satanic ritual to bring Tess back. I think that's it for the loose ends I had to tie up with my theory. So we're done here, I think. So that was my theory on the Knight's identity, story, and motives. And honestly, I think it covered pretty much everything we need to know. Now, I know it's not the most original thing ever, like the Mother 3 idea has been tossed around a few times, but I do think my theory has a lot of unique elements and ideas in it that haven't really been discussed much. I'm honestly pretty happy with what I came up with, and I think it does a pretty good job at explaining Deltarune's mysterious main antagonist. And honestly, I was genuinely not expecting to get that much information on the night in chapters 3 and 4. And I was certainly not expecting to literally fight the knight in the end of chapter 3. But what can I say? Tricky Tony got me again. Now that being said, let's talk a bit about the channel in general. Now, I still have a lot of videos that I want to make, like the Affirmation Gaster video, and I definitely want to talk about the Eggman. I have a lot of things to say about him. There are also a few other things that I have theories about, like what Som is gonna use the shadow crystals for, and what his part in the story is going to be, because I do think he's gonna do something crazy. But those are theories for another time. Also, if you couldn't tell, this is really the first time I've used a script for a video, so it's not the best thing ever. I honestly have a long way to go before my videos can be as good as I want them to be. But this is a good first attempt, I think. Also, what do you think of my voice? This is technically not the first video I've used my real voice on, but since I did use it on my video talking about the announcement of chapters 3 and 4. But this is like the first actual full-length video with my real voice, so I wanted to hear your thoughts on it. Also, speaking of which, I was also thinking of making non-Undertale and Deltarune videos on various topics and various games that I also like, so I'd like to hear your thoughts about that in the comments below. And yeah, outside of that, there isn't much more I want to say, just that I try to be more consistent with my uploads now, and that I appreciate your support even in this drought of content in the past year. Honestly, didn't want it to go like that, but college had other plans. Anyway, that being said, if you like this video, Don't forget to like and subscribe and hit that notification bell to see more content from me for Undertale and Deltarune and even more. Also, leave your comments down below what you think, who you think the knight is, and your theories on it. I would love to hear what you have to say. And with that being said, I was Game Wisdom. This was the wise side of YouTube, and I'll see you in the next one.